Michael McCormack is the National Party MP for the Riverina in southern New South Wales, covering such areas as Griffith and Wagga. Good morning.
Good morning, Chris.
The Barley Nine, there's been this extraordinary bipartisan, multi-partisan push to save the lives of Andrew Chan and Myron Sukumaran. With the benefit of hindsight, a wonderful thing. Do you think perhaps Australian governments of both persuasions should have put more effort in the past in trying to get their death sentences commuted to life when the former president may have been more open to such suggestions?
Look, I think everything has been done that could possibly be done, and the effort in recent times, as you say, in a bipartisan fashion, has been tremendous. And the candlelight vigil this morning, it just goes to show the passion, the advocacy, and the forgiveness that is there for poor young Andrew and poor young Myron, two men, ages 31 and 34, who face the ultimate punishment for their crime. And look, anybody who's ever been touched by someone who has lost their life through heroin, has a certain view on this. But many of those too are also forgiving of what this pair did. They face the death penalty, and you put yourself in their shoes, you put yourself in their family shoes. This is a no-win situation. I think we've got to respect Indonesians' sovereignty, but at the same time, these are two young men facing the ultimate punishment for their crimes that would have affected a lot of people's lives had that amount of heroin been able to be put out on the streets. But they've rehabilitated themselves. They've got a future, as have many of those people who are drug runners, who realise the gravity of their crimes and make a better life for themselves and reach out and go into their best selves.
Is the lesson from this then that government in Australia should act as quickly as possible if an Australian is sentenced to death overseas? Don't wait for 10 years, but try and start the process of... We've had Julie Bishop sort of offer a kind of a prisoner swap deal, something like that. Is perhaps one of the lessons from this that governments of whatever persuasion should act more quickly? Look,
we're certainly making every 11th hour bid in a valiant effort to try and get these two men off their death sentence.
I guess that's my question.
Sure.
Should we not wait till the 11th hour?
Sure, and in fairness, I think we have to allow the Indonesian court system, or any court system overseas, to run its course. But when the sentence was passed down, I know that previous governments certainly did all they could at the time to say, look, we would prefer to see these men's sentences commuted. That said, they also have to wait, and that has happened, for all the legal appeal processes to go through. That has happened. I know that the Kevin Rudd and the Julia Gillard administration certainly lobbied the Indonesian government for clemency, for pardon, and it's just an unfortunate situation. There's no winners in this, no winners whatsoever, and the extraordinary bipartisan support that has been shown, particularly in recent weeks, but over quite a while, just goes to show that Australians abhor, majority-wise, on the death penalty, and there's no winners.
Okay, moving on then, the other big story in Parliament House today, I guess, is the release of the intergenerational report. Parts of it have been dropped to the media in advance. Apparently there's a whole chapter that's critical of Labor and Labor's budget management, a point that governments often make. But do you think it's distracting from this report that's meant to open a debate and a policy discussion about where policy should go over the next 40 years, that it concentrates so much on whacking, Labor, the last Labor government? Does that distract from the message in the report?
Well, look, I don't think so. I think what we did see over the 6 years of the Rudd-Gillard-Rudd administration was some of the worst government and some of the worst policies that this nation has faced. Certainly we had a period there where the mining wealth contributed greatly to Australia's economic well-being, and that opportunity was wasted. And when we took over in September 2013, the Coalition inherited a legacy of debt and deficit that was not ever seen in Australian politics before. So I think if the IGR, the intergenerational report, confirms that, then that is a good thing. I don't want to steal too much of Treasurer Joe Hockey's thunder, because he obviously has to talk about the report later on today. But this is a report about how past policies, and certainly present policies, are going to affect the nation and the sorts of things that we should be doing to help our children and grandchildren into the future.
Okay, we already know something of what's in the report. Clearly there's a lot we don't know until it's released later today. But there's some graphs in there, trajectories, that under Labor, if their policies had remained unchanged for 40 years, that spending would have blown out to something like 37% of GDP, which is massively higher than it is now. But with just the measures brought in the last budget, that's down to about 31%. And indeed, if the whole of the budget had passed, then there'd be no problem in 40 years' time. So how bad was the debt and deficit disaster if it could have been fixed in one budget for a period of 40 years? People have to say, what was the rush? I mean, surely you weren't planning to be in government for just 1 year.
No, and look, we'd certainly like to be in government for 40 years, Chris, but look, we inherited $123 billion worth of cumulative deficits, and had we done nothing, $667 billion of debt going forward just over the short-term period.
But it doesn't sound that difficult to fix it if the figures in the report are correct.
But we're on a trajectory that is going to improve the budget over the years. And look, Joe Hockey's been up front and said that we're not going to produce a surplus this year or next year, but we will get to a surplus position. And I think the Australian public realised that was the case, that we were in a mess and that we were the sensible people to fix it. That's what coalition governments do. That's what national Liberal governments do. They actually get in and fix the debt and deficit legacy always left by Labor. And the spending was out of control. The parameters needed to be put into place. Last year's was a tough budget. This year's will also, I would imagine, be a pretty tough budget. But going forward, each and every following budget from then on would get a little easier because of some of the policy settings that we were putting in place. But the IGR needs to be able to... The community needs to understand that we need to bring along the community with us. We need to bring business along with us, and that's what we're doing in an effort to lift productivity by our policy settings to improve this country to the way it needs to be.
Okay, some of the government's budget measures from its first budgets are now being dead, buried and cremated, if I can put it like that, the GPK payment. Where would you suggest that savings might be found in the future?
Well, for a start, Labor could get on board with some of the savings measures that they put in place that they're now blocking in the Senate. There are a whole host of opportunities that we could use, and just by the sorts of things that we've already done, by stopping the boats, there's a huge saving, $10 billion in just stopping the boats. We're getting on with building the roads of the 21st century. We said we'd do it, we are doing it, and that's going to lift productivity, lift congestion in the cities, but more so increase opportunities in regional areas for such things as inland rail. So all those sorts of things are going to help boost productivity, and we are going to help business. We're open for business, and we're going to get this nation back on track, mark my words.
Now, can I ask you a question? As the member for the Riverina, I guess when the Murray-Darling Basin Plan was introduced, there was no area of the basin that was more affected than your electorate.
None.
Irrigators on the Murrumbidgee River in particular. Now that it's been in place for some time, what do you think of the plan? Do you think it's largely effective? Are there bits of it you think aren't working? Would you like to see it abolished or revisited or amended? What's your view?
Well, look, I moved a disallowance motion on the Murray-Darling Basin back in December 2012. I didn't like it. I still have grave reservations about it. But look, I think, and many of the irrigators are inclined to believe that with the processes in place, the legislation has been put through to put the legislation back into Parliament with the Senate the way it is, with the Greens the way they are, we might get a bit worse outcome than what we've got now. So, if we will do what we say we're going to do. We're going to cap water buybacks at 1,500 gigalitres. That means that there's only a parcel of a few hundred gigalitres of water to be recovered leading up to 2019. That can happen. There are willing sellers, and there are people who want to give up their water for a good price. with that 1,500 gigalitre cap on buyback, which will be legislated, it was an election promise. I think we can see a situation with money being spent on-farm infrastructure rather than the Labor Greens way of doing it, and that's just overbank floods and just water buyback willy-nilly and just looking after South Australia and not the rest of the Murray-Darling Basin. I think we can reach an outcome which everybody will be happy with.
So provided it's administered properly, I guess that's a big proviso, but that the plan can be a success for environment and irrigators.
Well, look, there has to be a triple bottom line approach, and the Coalition acknowledges that. We've always said that there needs to be social, economic as well as environmental outcomes for this policy. With Labor and the Greens, it was just an environmental document, it was just an environmental push. But look, we need to make sure that those, not just the river communities and not just the irrigators, but indeed rural and regional Australia, right up and down the Murray-Darling Basin, extends from Queensland right through to South Australia. We need to make sure that those communities which grow the food, which grow the fibre for our nation and for other nations too, are put in a position where they can continue to do that on behalf of our balance of payments, and that's important too in the context of getting our economy back on track.
Okay, Michael McCormack, thanks for your time today.
Thank you, Chris.